I still remember the smell. That's the thing they don't tell you about Vietnam, how it smells. Not just the jungle rot or the constant dampness that never left your boots. I mean the particular smell of that country. Earthy, ancient, like nothing I'd ever encountered growing up in Ohio. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I swear I can still smell it. 53 years later, and it's right there, pulling me back. My name is James Erickson. I was a specialist with the 25th Infantry Division, deployed to Vietnam in late 1967. I was 20 years old. Before that, I'd never been further from home than Kentucky. I had a girlfriend, Margaret, Maggie I called her. We were talking about getting married when I got back. I've never shared this story publicly. For decades, I didn't talk about it at all. Not to Maggie, who did become my wife. Not to my children. Not even to the other vets at the VFW hall. How do you explain something like this? How do you tell someone you died and came back? But I'm 73 now, and I figure if I don't tell it soon, I'll take it to my grave. And I promised. I promised them I wouldn't do that. So here it is. The whole thing, exactly as I remember it. I wasn't a particularly religious kid growing up. We went to church on Sundays, sure, Lutheran, but it was more tradition than devotion. I believed in God in the way most young men did back then, as a distant concept, someone to maybe check in with when things got rough. Vietnam changed that. Not right away, but it did. We landed in country in November 1967. I remember stepping off that plane and the wall of heat and humidity that hit me, like walking into a sauna, only you couldn't walk back out. Some of the guys started sweating through their uniforms before we even got our gear. The veterans, the guys who'd been there a while, you could spot them right away. They had this look, not just the 1,000-yard stare you hear about, but something else. Like they were constantly listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. I'd find out why soon enough. Our unit was assigned to operations near the Cambodian border, mostly small villages and dense jungle. We were tasked with pacification efforts, a fancy word for trying to win over the local population while hunting down the Viet Cong who moved like ghosts through the terrain. My first few months were surprisingly uneventful. Some sporadic firefights, nothing major. We'd patrol, sweat, slap mosquitoes, and patrol some more. The monotony was almost worse than combat. Your mind plays tricks on you when you're constantly waiting for something terrible to happen. We had this Sergeant Reynolds, who'd been in country for almost 2 tours. Man looked like he was carved from granite, with a permanent squint from staring into the jungle too long. He used to tell us, "It ain't the bullet with your name on it you gotta worry about. It's all the ones addressed to whom it may concern." It was his way of keeping us alert, I guess. By April 1968, things had changed. After the Tet Offensive, the whole country felt like it was on fire. We were running more aggressive patrols, making contact more frequently. The VC were everywhere and nowhere. You'd sweep through a village in the morning, declare it clear, and by nightfall take fire from the same huts you'd searched hours before. I'd made friends with a few guys in my platoon. Tommy Mendoza from California, big guy with an even bigger laugh, said he was going to open a surf shop when he got home. Dave Wilson, quiet kid from somewhere in Kansas who carried his Bible everywhere, but never seemed to read it. And Robert Jackson, we called him Jax, a black kid from Detroit who could fix anything mechanical and was always talking about the Mustang he was going to buy when he rotated back to the world. We weren't best friends or anything, not at first. But when you're in that situation, sharing a poncho during monsoon season or splitting your last cigarette, bonds form fast. On May 17, 1968, we were sent to patrol an area about 30 clicks west of Tai Ninh. Intelligence, if you could call it that, suggested VC movement in the area, possibly a supply route. Nothing we hadn't done 100 times before. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. I wrote a letter to Maggie, which wasn't unusual, but this one was different. I found myself telling her where I'd hidden her birthday present before I shipped out, and how my mom's lasagna recipe was written inside the cover of her Betty Crocker cookbook. Details. Things you tell someone when you're not sure you'll get another chance. I almost tore it up in the morning, feeling foolish. But I didn't. I sealed it and gave it to the mail clerk before we moved out. Dawn broke hazy that day, the sun trying to burn through mist that clung to the jungle like a shroud. We moved out in 2 squads, 12 men each. Standard formation, 5 meters between each man, communicating mostly with hand signals. The jungle swallowed sound in strange ways. Sometimes you could hear a twig snap 100 meters away. Other times you couldn't hear someone shouting from 10 feet. 3 hours in, nothing. Just the usual symphony of insects, birds and the occasional monkey screaming in the distance. The humidity was oppressive, like breathing through a wet towel. My uniform was soaked through, from sweat, from brushing against wet vegetation, from the constant invisible rain that seemed to fall from the leaves above. Mendoza was on point, then Sergeant Reynolds, then me. We were approaching a small clearing when Mendoza held up his fist, the signal to stop. Something had caught his attention. We froze. Nothing moved. Even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then Reynolds motioned for us to move forward, slowly. We emerged from the thick vegetation into a small clearing, maybe 30 meters across. On the other side was what looked like an abandoned hamlet, 3 or 4 thatched huts, a small garden plot overgrown with weeds. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was too quiet. Even the insects had stopped their constant chittering. Reynolds must have felt it too. He signaled for us to spread out, approach with caution. I remember shifting my M16 from safe to semi-automatic, the small click of the selector switch sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. I took 3 steps into that clearing when the world exploded. The first RPG hit just to our right, the blast throwing me sideways. Before I could even register what was happening, the air filled with the unmistakable rattle of a K-47 fire. They had us in a perfect crossfire, shooting from concealed positions on 3 sides. Ambush! Get down! Reynolds was shouting, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The ringing in my ears from the explosion distorted everything. I dropped to my stomach, crawling toward a slight depression in the ground that offered minimal cover. Dirt kicked up around me as bullets tore into the earth. I could hear the sharp crack of our return fire, the deeper sound of M60 machine guns as our gunners tried to suppress the enemy positions. Mendoza's hit. Medic. Someone was calling out. I risked a glance and saw Tommy sprawled face down about 15 meters to my right. He wasn't moving. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. The radio operator was frantically calling for air support, for artillery, for anything. But we all knew the truth. We were at least 30 minutes from any meaningful help. Fall back to the tree line. Reynolds was directing the withdrawal, his voice steady despite the chaos. Fire and movement. Jackson, Wilson, give us covering fire. I began to crawl backward, keeping my head down, firing short bursts toward the flashes I could see in the jungle ahead. The VC were well concealed. I couldn't see actual fighters, just muzzle flashes and occasional movement. That's when I heard a distinctive sound that still haunts my dreams. The hollow metallic thunk of a mortar being fired. One round, then another. Incoming! Someone screamed. The first mortar round landed near the far edge of our position. The second was closer. They were walking them in, adjusting their fire with deadly precision. I made it to the edge of the clearing, the relative safety of the tree line, just meters away. Jax was there, reloading his M16, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Where's Wilson? I shouted over the din. Jax just shook his head. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. I turned back toward the clearing, thinking of Mendoza still lying out there. Maybe he was alive. Maybe I could reach him. Don't even think about it, Erickson. Jax grabbed my arm. It's suicide. The third mortar round hit directly in the center of the clearing. What happened next seems to unfold in slow motion in my memory. The explosion wasn't just sound and fury. It was a physical force that picked me up and threw me backward. I remember seeing the blue sky, then the green canopy of trees spinning in a kaleidoscope of color as I tumbled through the air. The impact when I hit the ground forced all the air from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Just pure animal panic as my body tried to remember how to draw breath. Then the pain hit, not sharp like I'd expected, but a strange spreading warmth in my abdomen and chest. I looked down and saw the dark stains spreading across my uniform. At first, I thought it was mud or water. It took my shocked brain a few seconds to recognize it as blood. My blood. Shrapnel. Had to be. The mortar must have sent fragments flying in every direction. I'd caught several pieces in my torso. I'm hit, I tried to say, but no sound came out. Just a wet, gurgling noise that frightened me more than the wound itself. I tried to press my hands against the wounds, to stop the bleeding like we'd been trained. But there were too many entry points, and my fingers felt numb, clumsy. The blood kept coming, pulsing between my fingers with each heartbeat. The firefight was still raging around me, but it seemed distant now, like I was hearing it through water. My vision started to narrow, darkness creeping in from the edges like a vignette in an old photograph. I saw Jax crawling toward me, his mouth moving, probably shouting something, but I couldn't hear him anymore. Just the strange rushing sound in my ears, like standing next to a fast-moving river. I thought about Maggie, about that letter I'd written. Had I told her I loved her? I couldn't remember. That seemed important suddenly, that she know I loved her, that everyone I loved knew it. Jax reached me, his hands replacing mine, pressing hard against my wounds. The pain should have been excruciating, but instead it was fading. Everything was fading. I felt cold. Strange to feel cold in Vietnam. It was never cold there. Jax was looking at something over my shoulder. His eyes widened. I wanted to turn to see what he was looking at, but I couldn't move my head anymore. My last clear memory is of Jax's face, his features set in grim determination as he shouted for a medic. But his eyes held something I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror when I'd written that letter to Maggie. It was goodbye, then darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. But I was still aware, still thinking, still, me. Am I dead? I remember wondering. There was no pain now, no sensation of having a body at all, just consciousness floating in an empty void. I don't know how long I drifted in that darkness. Time seemed meaningless. It could have been seconds or centuries. Then gradually I became aware of something else in the void with me. A presence. Not something I could see or hear in any conventional sense, but something I could feel. Like when you know someone has entered a room, even though your back is turned to the door. I wasn't alone. Fear should have been my reaction, I think. But fear requires a body, adrenaline, a racing heart, shallow breathing. Without a body, there was just curiosity, a kind of pure, childlike wonder. Hello? I tried to say, though I had no mouth to speak with. Yet somehow my intention to communicate was understood. The darkness began to change. Not brightening exactly, but thinning, like fog burning away under the morning sun. I still couldn't see anything, but the quality of the darkness was different. Less oppressive, more expectant. That's when I heard it. Not with ears, but somehow more directly, as if the sound bypassed my senses entirely and appeared fully formed in my consciousness. James, just my name. But in that simple word was recognition, acknowledgement, and something else. A profound sense of being known. Not just my name, but everything about me. Every thought I'd ever had. Every choice I'd ever made. Every joy and regret and secret fear. All laid bare and accepted without judgment. I felt myself responding, moving toward that voice. There was no physical movement. I still had no sensation of having a body. But my awareness was shifting, orienting itself toward the source of that voice, like a flower turning toward the sun. The darkness continued to thin, and I became aware of a subtle gradient emerging. Not light yet, but the promise of light somewhere ahead. Am I dead? I asked again, this time directing the question outward. Your body is dying, came the reply. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, yet perfectly comprehensible to me. But you are here. The distinction seemed important, though I didn't fully understand it. Where is here? I asked. The threshold was the answer. The space between? As these words registered, the darkness gave way to a soft, diffuse luminescence, not coming from any particular direction, but simply existing everywhere at once. I still couldn't see anything solid or defined, just variations in the quality of this strange half-light. And then forms began to coalesce from the light. Not solid shapes, but suggestions of shapes. Outlines filled with gently swirling luminescence. They surrounded me, these forms, dozens of them. As they became more defined, I realized with a shock that they were human figures, or had been human once. The closest one approached me, or perhaps I approached it. The distinction seemed meaningless here. And as it drew near, features became visible within the swirling light. A face formed, then solidified enough for me to recognize it. It was Wilson. Dave Wilson, who'd carried his Bible everywhere. Who I'd just seen die in the ambush. But he wasn't as I'd last seen him. Dirty, terrified, bloodied. This Wilson was complete, whole. His face held a serenity I'd never seen in life. His eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed ancient. Dave, I tried to say. The concept more than the word reaching out to him. He smiled. God, that smile contained universes. And I felt rather than heard his response. It's okay, James. It's okay. Those simple words carried so much meaning, so much reassurance, that I felt myself expanding with relief. Whatever this was, wherever I was, it wasn't something to fear. Other figures were approaching now, resolving into recognizable forms. There was Mendoza, his usual grin in place, but with a depth behind his eyes that had never been there in life. And others, faces from our unit who had been killed in previous engagements. Sergeant Dawson, who'd stepped on a mine 2 months earlier. Martinez, who'd taken a sniper round through the neck during a patrol in March. They formed a loose circle around me, these fallen comrades, their forms glowing with that inner light. But they weren't alone. Behind them were other figures, hundreds, maybe thousands, stretching back into infinity. Some wore the unmistakable outlines of military uniforms from different eras. A cluster of them appeared to be dressed in the gear of World War II GIs. Others wore what looked like Civil War uniforms, both blue and gray side by side. Further back were hazier forms in older, unfamiliar military attire. "Wow, what is this?" I asked, awe replacing confusion. "Who are all these people?" "Those who went before." Wilson's voice, that wasn't a voice, replied. "Those who understand." I noticed something then that sent a shock of recognition through my non-physical being. Interspersed among the American uniforms were others, the distinctive silhouettes of Vietnamese fighters, both NVA regulars and the simple black pajamas of the Viet Cong. Among them, I was certain I could make out the shadowy forms of those who had ambushed us just, how long ago? Minutes? Hours? Time had no meaning here. Yet there was no hostility, no division between these former enemies. They stood together, part of the same vast assembly, united by something that transcended the conflicts that had claimed their lives. "I don't understand," I said, the concept of confusion radiating from whatever remained of me. Wilson's form drew closer. "You're not meant to." "Not yet. This isn't your time, James." The words brought a sudden pang of, not fear exactly, but reluctance. Because despite my confusion, despite the strangeness of this place, I felt a deep, soul-level recognition. Like coming home after being away for so long, you'd forgotten what home felt like. "I don't want to go back," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. A ripple seemed to pass through the assembled forms. Something like compassion, like understanding. "We know," came Wilson's reply, gentle but firm. "But you have more to do." What? What do I have to do?" Instead of answering directly, Wilson's form seemed to expand, the light within him growing brighter. The other figures followed suit, their individual outlines becoming less distinct as they merged into a collective radiance. From within that growing light emerged another presence, different from the others, more substantial somehow, more real if that makes any sense. It didn't take a human form, remaining instead a concentrated point of light so brilliant I should have been blinded. But with no physical eyes to damage, I could perceive it directly. And from that light came a communication more profound than words. Not a voice, not language, but pure understanding flowing into me. If I had to translate it into English, and any translation feels hopelessly inadequate, it would be something like, "You have seen beyond the veil. You have witnessed that death is not an ending, that those divided in life are united beyond it. This knowledge is both gift and burden." I felt myself responding, not with words, but with the very essence of my being, opening to this communication like a parched earth to rain. The light continued, "Return. Remember, when the time is right, speak what you have seen. There are those who need to hear it." "How will I know when the time is right?" I asked, still without words. "How will I know what to say?" "You will know," came the simple reply, "and we will be with you." As this exchange occurred, I became aware of a new sensation, a gentle but insistent pulling, as if some invisible cord attached to my being was drawing me backward, away from the light, away from the assembled souls. Wilson's form separated slightly from the collective radiance, his features becoming distinct once more. "It's time, James," he said, and I could feel his regret mirroring my own. "But remember, this isn't goodbye. Just see you later." I wanted to resist, to stay in this place of peace and understanding. But the pulling sensation was growing stronger, the light beginning to recede. "Wait," I called out, desperate to hold on to this experience for just a moment longer. "Tell me, what's it like?" "Where you are." Wilson's form was fading now, but his answer reached me clearly. "It's like coming home from a war you never should have had to fight, to find everyone you ever loved waiting to welcome you. It's everything you hope for, James, and nothing you fear." The light was dimming rapidly now, the countless forms blurring together as they retreated from my perception. The void was returning, but different now. Rhythmic pulses of sensation began to intrude on my awareness. Pain was returning. Dull at first, then sharpening into specific points of agony in my chest, my abdomen. Sound came next, a steady electronic beeping. Voices muffled and distant at first, then clearer. Pressure's stabilizing. I think we've got him back. Christ, it's a miracle. With wounds like these, someone get more plasma. And let Captain Hendricks know we've got a live one. The darkness was no longer complete. Reddish light filtered through what I gradually realized were my closed eyelids. I tried to open them, but they felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted down with lead. I became aware of my body again. Not the absence of pain I'd experienced in that other place, but the very real, very intense presence of it. Every heartbeat sent fresh waves of agony through my torso. Something was in my throat, preventing me from swallowing properly. A tube. A breathing tube. With monumental effort, I managed to crack my eyelids open. Blinding fluorescent light assaulted my vision, making me wince. Blurry figures moved around me, their green surgical gowns splattered with what I realized must be my blood. A face loomed over me, a man maybe in his 40s, his surgical mask pulled down to reveal a salt and pepper beard. "Welcome back, son," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, forgetting about the tube in my throat. The resulting choke and gag sent fresh pain rocketing through my chest. "Easy, easy," the doctor said, placing a gentle but firm hand on my shoulder. "Don't try to talk. You're at the 12th evac hospital in Kuchi. You took some bad hits, but you're going to make it. Make it. I was going to live." The realization should have brought relief, but instead I felt a profound sense of loss. The peace of that other place, the understanding, the light, all receding like a dream upon waking. I must have been crying because the doctor's expression softened further. "It's okay, son. The pain's pretty bad, I know. We'll get you something for that." He turned to someone out of my field of vision. "Let's give him another 5 of morphine." "No," I wanted to say. "It's not the pain." But the tube prevented any speech, and perhaps that was a mercy. How could I possibly explain? A warmth spread through my veins as the morphine entered my system. The edges of my vision began to blur again, the harsh fluorescent lights taking on a softer glow that reminded me just for a moment of that other light. As consciousness started to slip away, I heard the doctor speaking to someone else. "Never seen anything like it. Multiple shrapnel wounds, collapsed lung, lacerated liver, massive blood loss. He was flatlined for almost 4 minutes. By all rights, he should be dead." The other voice, a nurse maybe, replied quietly, "Guess it wasn't his time." No, I thought as darkness reclaimed me. It wasn't my time, and I had a message to deliver. The next few days passed in a blur of pain, morphine, and fractured consciousness. I'd wake up, see the medical staff moving around me, then slip back into darkness. Sometimes I'd dream of that other place, the light, the faces, the peace. But the dreams were becoming less vivid, more distant with each awakening. On what I later learned was my 4th day at the evac hospital, I woke up more fully. The breathing tube was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula feeding me oxygen. The pain was still there, but duller now, managed by whatever was dripping into my IV. A nurse noticed I was awake and approached my bed. She was young, probably not much older than me, with blonde hair tucked under her cap and tired eyes that still managed to smile. "Welcome back, specialist," she said, checking my vitals. "How's the pain, scale of 1 to 10? I had to think about it. 6, I croaked, my throat raw from the tube they'd removed. She nodded. "That's better than yesterday." "You said 8. I didn't remember that at all." "Water?" I managed to ask. She held a cup with a straw to my lips, supporting my head with her other hand. The water was lukewarm, but felt like heaven on my parched throat. "Where's Jax?" I asked after drinking. "Robert Jackson. He was with me when..." Something in her expression changed just slightly, but enough for me to notice. "I'll see if I can find out," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Right now you need to focus on resting. Doctor will be by soon to check your incisions." She was deflecting, and I knew what that meant. But I had to be sure. "The others," I persisted. "My squad. What happened to them?" She sighed, setting the water cup down on the small table beside my bed. "I don't have that information, specialist. I'm sorry, but I'll ask around, okay?" I nodded, too tired to press further. But as she turned to go, I reached out and caught her wrist. The movement sent pain shooting through my chest, but I ignored it. "Wait," I said. "What day is it?" "May 22nd. She replied, gently extracting her wrist from my weak grip. "You've been here 5 days." 5 days. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. "Thank you," I whispered, letting my arm fall back to the bed. Try to get some more rest, she said, adjusting my IV. Your body's been through hell. As she walked away, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to think. 5 days since the ambush. 5 days since I died? Been near death? I wasn't even sure what to call it. But whatever had happened in those 4 minutes when my heart had stopped beating, it had been real. More real than the hospital bed I was lying in. More real than the pain in my body. I needed to remember it all, every detail, before it faded completely. The light, the faces, the message. Especially the message. When the time is right, speak what you have seen. There are those who need to hear it. I repeated these words in my mind, trying to fix them there, to keep them safe from the drugs and the pain and the inevitable dulling of memory. The doctor came by later, a different one from the bearded man I'd seen when I first regained consciousness. This one was younger, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been working too many hours without enough sleep. Remarkable progress, Specialist Erickson, he said after examining my wounds. Still a long way to go, but you're beating the odds. When can I be transferred? I asked. He raised an eyebrow. Eager to get out of our 5-star accommodations? I tried to smile but wasn't sure if I managed it. Just wondering what happens next. Well, he said, making notes on my chart. Once you're stable enough, probably another week or so, you'll be transferred to Japan for more comprehensive care. After that, depending on your recovery, either back to a stateside military hospital or, he let the sentence trail off, or back to my unit. I finished for him. He gave me a long look. That's unlikely, Specialist. The damage to your internal organs was extensive. Your left lung was shredded by shrapnel. Your liver and spleen both sustained significant trauma. The fact that you're alive at all is frankly astonishing. I absorbed this information silently. I'd known my injuries were serious. You don't flatline for 4 minutes from a paper cut. But hearing the details made it more concrete. So what you're saying is, I'm going home. He nodded. Eventually. There's months of recovery ahead of you. But yes, once you're well enough to travel that distance, you'll be heading back to the States. A complicated mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, guilt, fear, anticipation. Going home was what every grunt in Vietnam dreamed about. But not like this. Not leaving your unit behind. Not when some of them wouldn't be going home at all. Doctor, I said as he turned to leave. Can you find out about the rest of my squad? Please. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of a question he'd heard too many times from too many wounded soldiers. I'll see what I can do, he promised in much the same tone the nurse had used. Later that evening, as the hospital quieted for the night, a different nurse brought me my dinner. Some kind of soup, jello, and a slice of bread that might have been fresh yesterday. I wasn't hungry, but I knew I needed to eat to regain my strength. As I struggled with the soup, a shadow fell across my bed. I looked up to see a chaplain standing there. A captain by his insignia, with kind eyes and a face that seemed made for smiling, though at the moment he looked solemn. Specialist Erickson, he asked. I'm Captain Brooks. May I sit with you for a moment? I nodded, setting aside my barely touched dinner tray. He pulled up a folding chair next to my bed, settling into it with a sigh that spoke of long days and heavy burdens. How are you feeling, son? He asked. I've been better, sir, I replied, attempting a weak smile. But I guess I've been worse too. He nodded, acknowledging the understatement. The medical staff says you've been asking about your unit. I straightened slightly, ignoring the pain the movement caused. Yes, sir. No one will tell me anything. Captain Brooks folded his hands in his lap, his expression gentle but serious. Sometimes that's because they don't know, but sometimes, he paused. Sometimes it's because they're leaving certain conversations to people like me. My heart sank. I'd suspected, of course. Known, really. But having it confirmed was different. Sir, how many? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. From your immediate squad? 7 KIA, including your sergeant. 3 wounded besides yourself. 7. Out of 12. More than half. The names came unbidden to my mind. Reynolds. Mendoza. Wilson. Who else? I was afraid to ask. Robert Jackson? I forced myself to say. The chaplain's expression softened slightly. Wounded but alive. He was medevaxed to the 95th evac hospital. Different location from you. Relief washed over me, so intense it brought tears to my eyes. Jax had made it. He's the one who dragged you to cover, you know. Captain Brooks continued. After you were hit, got wounded himself in the process. Took a bullet through the shoulder, but managed to get you both behind a fallen tree. Probably saved your life. I wiped at my eyes with the back of my hand. Sounds like Jax. The others who survived are Specialists Cooper and Ramirez, both wounded but expected to recover. I tried to picture their faces. Cooper was easy, red-haired kid from Pennsylvania, always talking about his girlfriend back home. Ramirez was harder to bring into focus. He'd been a recent transfer to our unit. Quiet, kept to himself. "Thank you for telling me, sir," I said, my voice thick. Captain Brooks nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else, Erickson. Something rather remarkable." I looked at him questioningly. "Your friend Jackson has been trying to get word to you. He's been quite insistent about it, apparently. Wanted to make sure you knew something." "What's that, sir?" "He says, and these are his words, not mine, 'Tell Erickson I saw them too. Tell him it was real.'" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the chaplain, unable to speak for several seconds. "Saw them?" I finally managed. "Saw who?" Captain Brooks shook his head. He wouldn't elaborate, just kept repeating that I needed to tell you that, and that you would understand. My mind was racing. Had Jax experienced something similar? Had he seen the same light, the same faces? It seemed impossible yet. "Thank you, sir," I said again, more fervently this time. That means a lot." The chaplain studied my face curiously. "Does that message make sense to you, son?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Yes, sir. I think it does." He waited, clearly hoping I would elaborate, but I remained silent. This wasn't something I was ready to discuss, especially not with someone I'd just met, chaplain or not. After a moment, he seemed to accept my reticence. "Well, I'm glad I could pass it along. If you ever want to talk about your squad, about what happened, about anything at all, my door's always open." "I appreciate that, sir." He stood preparing to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Erickson. The doctors here, they're calling you a miracle case. Say they've never seen anyone survive wounds like yours, especially after flatlining for as long as you did." His eyes held mine steadily. "In my line of work, I've learned there are no accidents. If you're still here, there's a reason for it." With that, he gave me a small nod and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the remains of my cooling dinner. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw faces, some from my squad, bloodied and terrified in their final moments, and others as I'd seen them in that other place, radiant and at peace. The contrast was jarring, painful, but more than the faces, it was Jack's message that kept me awake. I saw them too. It was real. What exactly had he seen? The same spirits I had? The same light? And how was that possible? We hadn't died together. I'd flatlined in surgery hours after the ambush. Jax had been wounded, but never in critical condition from what the chaplain had said. Yet somehow he'd seen something that convinced him we'd shared the same experience. I needed to talk to him, to compare notes. But we were in different hospitals and I was in no condition to go anywhere. The next morning I asked the nurse if there was any way I could get a message to the 95th evac hospital. She looked skeptical but promised to ask. To my surprise, later that day, a young corporal from the communications unit appeared at my bedside with a field telephone. "Specialist Erickson?" he asked, looking down at a slip of paper in his hand. "I've got the 95th on the line. They say Specialist Jackson is able to come to the phone for a few minutes. You want to talk to him?" I nodded eagerly, wincing as I tried to sit up straighter. The corporal helped adjust my bed, then handed me the receiver. "Jax," I said into the phone, my voice still raspy. "Erickson?" The sound of his voice, alive and real, brought a lump to my throat. "Holy shit, man! They told me you were hanging by a thread." "Yeah, well, you know me. Too stubborn to die." He laughed, a sound I'd feared I might never hear again. "Damn right. Listen, they're only giving me a couple minutes on this thing. You got my message?" "Yeah," I said, lowering my voice even though the corporal had stepped away to give me privacy. "The chaplain told me." "What did you mean, Jax?" What did you see?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Quieter, more serious. "Not over the phone, man. But it was. After you got hit, when I was trying to stop the bleeding, you were dying right there under my hands. And then," he trailed off. "And then," I prompted. "And then I saw something. Something I can't explain. People who shouldn't have been there. Light that had no source." Another pause. "Wilson. I saw Wilson Erickson. Standing right there in the middle of a firefight, looking different. Peaceful. He looked at me, and I swear to God, he nodded like he was telling me everything was going to be okay. Then he turned to you and what, Jax?" And he put his hand on your chest, right where the worst bleeding was. That's when the medic finally reached us. Next thing I know, they're loading us both onto the medevac, and here I am. I closed my eyes, absorbing his words. It wasn't identical to my experience, but the parallels were unmistakable. Wilson, the light, the sense of peace amidst chaos. I thought I was hallucinating. Jax continued, losing too much blood maybe, or just the shock of seeing you all torn up like that. But then they told me you actually died on the operating table and came back. And I just knew. Whatever I saw, it was real. It happened. I believe you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Because I saw something too. When I was gone. What was it? What did you see? Before I could answer, I heard a voice in the background on his end. Sorry, sir, Jax said to someone. Just another minute. Then to me. They're saying I gotta go. Listen, Erickson, when we both get stateside, we need to talk about this. For real. Yeah, I agreed. We will. Take care of yourself, man. I'll see you back in the world. You too, Jax. And ... Thanks for saving my life. There was a brief silence. Don't mention it. That's what brothers do. The line went dead, and I handed the receiver back to the waiting corporal, my mind spinning with this new information. Whatever had happened to me hadn't been isolated. Jax had experienced something too. Something connected to my own. Journey? Vision? I still didn't have the right word for it. But I did have confirmation now. It had been real. The next week passed slowly. My condition improved steadily, not quickly enough for my taste, but the doctors seemed impressed by my progress. The pain gradually became more manageable, and I was able to sit up, then stand, then take a few shuffling steps with assistance. On May 29th, 12 days after the ambush, I was deemed stable enough for transfer. They loaded me onto a C-130 medical transport, along with 24 other wounded men, bound for the Army hospital at Camp Zama, Japan. The flight was long and uncomfortable. The plane's vibrations sending spikes of pain through my healing wounds despite the morphine they'd given me before takeoff. I slept fitfully during the journey, drifting in and out of dreams filled with jungle heat and distant gunfire. Sometimes Wilson's face would appear, or Mendoza's, their expressions peaceful but their eyes sad, as if they knew something I didn't yet understand. Japan was a blur of new doctors, more surgeries to repair the damage to my lung, physical therapy that left me exhausted and hurting, but a little stronger each day. I was one of hundreds of wounded men there, all of us in various states of recovery, all of us carrying the invisible wounds of Vietnam alongside our physical injuries. I made some acquaintances among the other patients, but no real friends. I kept to myself mostly, spending hours staring out the window at the manicured Japanese gardens surrounding the hospital, trying to reconcile the beauty and peace of that place with the horror and chaos I'd left behind. And always in quiet moments, my mind would return to that experience. The darkness, the light, the faces, the message. I began to write down everything I could remember, afraid that the details would fade with time and distance. I filled a small notebook the hospital chaplain had given me, trying to capture in words something that seemed to exist beyond language. In late June, after a month in Japan, the doctors decided I was stable enough for the long flight back to the States. I would be sent to Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. for continued treatment and rehabilitation. The night before my departure, I had a dream more vivid than any since the ambush. In it, I was back in that in-between place, but not lost in darkness this time. I stood in the midst of that soft, directionless light, and before me were the luminous forms I'd encountered before. Wilson, Mendoza, and the others who hadn't made it out of that clearing. Wilson approached me, his form more distinct than I remembered, his features clear. "It's almost time, James," he said, his voice as real as if he were standing beside my hospital bed. "Time for what?" I asked. "Knash to begin. The healing. The telling." He gestured to my notebook, which somehow was in my hands even though I'd left it on my bedside table. "You've been remembering. That's good, but remembering is just the first step." "I don't understand what you want me to do," I confessed. "Who am I supposed to tell? Utanana, what difference will it make?" Wilson smiled, that same smile that had comforted me in the darkness. "You'll know when the moment comes. Trust that." "I miss you guys," I said, the words catching in my throat. "I should have been with you." Wilson shook his head. "No, your path leads elsewhere." He placed a hand on my shoulder, and though he had no physical form, I felt the warmth of the touch. "We're not gone, James. Just changed. Remember that. I woke with tears streaming down my face, the dream still vivid in my mind. But unlike the actual experience, which had begun to take on the hazy quality of something half-remembered, this dream remained crystal clear, a reminder, a nudge. The flight to the States was long, but less painful than the one to Japan had been. My wounds were healing, though the doctors had made it clear I would never regain full function of my left lung, and the extensive scarring across my torso would be with me for life. Arriving at Walter Reed was overwhelming in a different way than arriving in Vietnam had been. There, it had been the alien heat and humidity, the constant tension, the awareness of unseen danger. Here it was the abrupt return to American life. The clean, antiseptic halls, the civilian clothes, the casual conversations about baseball games and movie stars that felt trivial after what I'd been through. The other patients understood, of course. Many were fresh from Vietnam themselves, carriers of the same invisible burden. We recognized it in each other without having to speak of it. A certain look in the eyes, a wariness that didn't belong in this safe, sterile environment, but couldn't be shed as easily as our uniforms. My parents came to visit within days of my arrival. My mother cried when she saw me, trying to hide it by fussing over the arrangement of flowers she'd brought, straightening my blankets, asking if I was eating enough. My father, a World War II veteran who'd fought in the Pacific, was more contained but no less affected. He gripped my hand hard, his eyes saying what his mouth couldn't. "You did good, son," was all he managed to say. "Real good." I didn't feel like I'd done anything good. I'd been ambushed, shot up, and evacuated, leaving others to die in my place. But I nodded anyway, accepting his words as the comfort they were meant to be. Maggie came the following week. She'd changed her hair, I noticed immediately. It was shorter, more styled than the long, straight locks I remembered. She'd been growing it out because I'd once mentioned I like long hair, but now it barely reached her shoulders. She approached my bed hesitantly, as if afraid I might have changed into someone unrecognizable. Maybe I had. "Hi, Jimmy," she said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "Hey, Mags." She sat in the visitor's chair, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "You look better than I expected." I attempted a smile. "That bad, huh?" No, that's not what I meant." She reached for my hand, then seemed to think better of it, letting her own fall back to her lap. "Your mom said you were pretty messed up." I was scared. "I'm okay," I lied. "Getting better every day." She nodded, her eyes taking in the hospital room, the other beds. Anything but meeting mine directly. "That's good. Really good." The conversation was strained, full of awkward pauses and meaningless small talk. She told me about her job at the department store, about mutual friends, about how her parents had moved to a new house across town. I listened, trying to care about these details of a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. When she finally left, promising to visit again soon, I felt relief more than anything else, which made me feel guilty, which in turn made me feel angry. It was a familiar cycle by then. The truth was, Maggie and I had been growing apart even before I shipped out. The draft in my deployment had frozen us in place, putting the relationship in a kind of stasis that wasn't the same as stability. We'd been high school sweethearts, but high school was over. She was building a life in Ohio. I'd been fighting a war in Vietnam. The distance between those realities couldn't be measured in miles alone. My recovery continued. Physical therapy, more surgeries to remove shrapnel fragments that had been too dangerous to extract initially, counseling sessions with well-meaning doctors who couldn't possibly understand what I'd experienced. I went through the motions, doing what was expected of me, saying what they wanted to hear. But at night, alone in my hospital bed, I would take out my notebook and continue writing about my experience beyond death. The details remained clear, defying the natural dulling of memory that time should have brought. If anything, certain aspects became more vivid, as if the experience were still unfolding within me, revealing new layers of meaning. I wrote about the light, about the faces, about the profound sense of being known and accepted. I wrote about the message I'd been given, though I still didn't understand its full implications. When the time is right, speak what you have seen. There are those who need to hear it. The time didn't feel right yet, or maybe I just wasn't ready. In August, 3 months after the ambush, I received a letter from Jax. He'd been discharged and was back home in Detroit, working at his uncle's garage while attending night classes at the community college on the GI Bill. "Still planning to get that Mustang," he wrote, "but saving up is taking longer than I thought. How you holding up? Doctors say when you might get out of there?" He didn't mention our shared experience directly, perhaps wary of putting such things in a letter that others might read, But near the end, he added, still think about that day a lot. About what I saw, sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. But then I remember you saw something too. That helps knowing I'm not crazy. Or if I am, at least I'm not alone in it. I wrote back immediately, a longer letter than I'd intended, filling him in on my recovery and the likelihood of a medical discharge within the next few months. I carefully avoided direct references to our shared experience, but I did include one line I hoped he would understand. What you saw was real. What we both saw. I'm still trying to figure out what it means, but I know it wasn't just shock or blood loss or morphine. It was something else, something more. In September, I was transferred to a VA rehabilitation center closer to home in Cincinnati. My parents visited more frequently there, and Maggie came once. Our conversation no less awkward than before. 2 weeks later, she wrote me a letter ending our relationship. It was kind, full of phrases like different paths and always care about you, but the message was clear. We were done. I felt sad but not devastated. Some part of me had known this was coming, had perhaps even been waiting for it. What we'd had belonged to a different life, a different version of myself that no longer existed. In early October, I received my medical discharge from the Army. Honorable discharge, Purple Heart, various other medals that felt meaningless in the face of what had happened, what I'd seen, what I'd lost. I moved back into my parents' house temporarily, sleeping in my childhood bedroom that felt both familiar and alien. The model airplane still hanging from the ceiling, the high school pennants on the walls, the bookshelf filled with Hardy Boys mysteries and science fiction paperbacks, all relics of a past life, a different James Erickson. I found a job at a local hardware store, work that wasn't too physically demanding given my ongoing recovery. The owner was a Korean War vet who didn't ask questions and gave me time off when I needed it for medical appointments. It wasn't a career, but it was something to do, somewhere to be that wasn't my parents' house or a hospital room. November 11th, 1968, Veterans Day. I'd avoided the local parade and ceremony, not ready to don my uniform or stand among strangers who would thank me for my service without understanding what the service had cost. Instead, I drove out to a small lake where I used to fish with my father when I was a boy. It was cold but sunny, the late autumn light glinting off the water, the trees around the shore bare but for a few stubborn leaves clinging to their branches. I sat on a weathered bench, gazing out at the water, lost in thought. So absorbed was I that I didn't notice the man approaching until he spoke. Mind if I join you? I looked up, startled. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and wind. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him. Free country, I said with a shrug, moving over slightly to make room. He sat beside me, his movements careful in the way of someone managing old injuries. We sat in silence for several minutes, both looking out at the lake. Beautiful spot, he finally said. Peaceful. I nodded, not particularly wanting conversation, but not rude enough to ignore him completely. I come here sometimes to think, he continued, to remember. Something in his tone made me glance over at him. His eyes were still fixed on the water, but they had a distant look, seeing something beyond the physical landscape before us. Remember what? I asked, despite myself. He turned to look at me then, his eyes clear and direct. The war, the men, the things I saw. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Which war? World War II. Pacific Theater. Marine Corps. He held out his hand. Frank Sullivan. I shook it automatically. James Erickson. Army. Vietnam. He nodded as if confirming something he'd already known. I thought so. You have the look. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I said nothing. When did you get back? He asked. Few months ago. Medical discharge. He nodded again. Bad? Bad enough. I didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. We fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. A shared understanding that needed no words. After a while, he spoke again, his voice quieter. I died, you know. At Peleliu, September 1944. I turned to stare at him, sure I'd misheard. You what? Died, he repeated simply. Took Japanese machine gun fire across the chest. Medics pronounced me dead on the beach. They were stacking bodies, waiting for Graves registration to come collect them. A small, strange smile crossed his face. Then one of the corpsmen noticed I was breathing. Barely, but enough. They rushed me to a field hospital, did what they could. Shipped me to Hawaii, then back to the States. Took a year to recover enough to walk without help. My heart was pounding in my chest. Why are you telling me this? He looked at me steadily. Because you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You've been there too. I swallowed hard, a knot forming in my throat. Près de réussir benware. Tonight, to the other side, and back. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather or the best bait for catching bass in this lake. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Frank Sullivan chuckled softly. Sure you do, son. I can see it in your eyes. It's why I sat down here in the first place. I recognized it, that look people get when they've seen beyond the veil and come back. My hands were trembling now. I shoved them into the pockets of my jacket. How would you know that look? Because I've been seeing it in the mirror for 24 years, he replied. And because after it happened, I started noticing others. Not many, it's rare, especially coming back from as far as we went. But enough. Enough to know I wasn't crazy or having some kind of religious hallucination like the doctor suggested. I was silent, my mind racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. This stranger, appearing on this day of all days, saying these things. What did you see? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. When you were gone, his expression softened. Light. Peace. Faces. Some I recognized, fellows from my unit who hadn't made it. Others I didn't know but somehow understood were waiting to guide me. He paused. And a message. My breath caught in my throat. A message? He nodded. That it wasn't my time. That I had to go back. That I needed to remember, and when the time was right, to speak what I had seen. The exact words. The exact message I'd received. How is this possible? I asked, not really expecting an answer. How are you here telling me this, today of all days? Frank Sullivan smiled again, that same small, knowing smile. I told you, after it happened, I started noticing others. Recognizing them. Just as I recognized you today. He gestured toward the lake. I come here often, but not always on Veterans Day. Today, though, today I felt a pull to be here. Like I needed to be here at this time on this bench. He shrugged. I've learned to trust those feelings. And you just... What? Go up to strangers and tell them you died once? He laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. No, not usually. Most people would think I was a few cards short of a full deck. But you... He studied my face. You've been holding it in, haven't you? This experience. Not knowing who to tell, if anyone would believe you. Afraid they'd think you were crazy, or trying to get attention, or just confused from the trauma and the drugs. His words hit so close to home that I couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, I managed to ask, did you tell people about what happened to you? Not for a long time, he admitted. First few years, I didn't tell anyone. Just tried to get on with living, to forget the war, the dying. Got married, had kids, worked my job at the post office. But it was always there, you know. The memory, the knowing. I nodded. I did know. Then in '52, my boy got sick. Real sick. Leukemia. Back then, that was pretty much a death sentence. Especially for a kid. His eyes grew distant again. The night the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do, I went to the hospital chapel. Wasn't even sure why. I hadn't been much for church since coming back from the war. But I went in and just sat there in the dark crying, asking why. Why take my boy when I'd already been given a second chance? He took a deep breath. That's when I felt it again. That same presence I'd felt when I died. And I knew suddenly what the message had meant. When the time is right, speak what you have seen. The time was right. My boy needed to hear it. What happened? I asked softly. I went to his room. He was awake. Pain kept him up most nights by then. I sat beside his bed and told him everything. About dying on that beach. About the light, the peace, the faces. About how death wasn't an end, just a transition, a change. Frank's voice grew husky with emotion. He listened to every word. And when I was done, this look came over his face. This peace. He reached for my hand and said, "Thanks, Dad. I'm not scared anymore." Tears welled in my eyes. Did he? Frank nodded. 2 days later, peaceful, holding his mother's hand. And mine. He wiped at his own eyes. That's when I knew. The message wasn't just for me. It was meant to be shared, to help others face their own transitions without fear. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. The sun was lower now, the light on the lake turning golden as afternoon faded toward evening. Since then, Frank continued eventually. I've shared my experience with others. Not many, only when it feels right, when I sense they need to hear it. Sometimes it's for people facing death, their own or a loved one's. Sometimes it's for people who have glimpsed the other side themselves and need to know they're not alone in what they saw. Like me, I said quietly. Like you, he agreed. And now you have a choice to make, James Erickson. The same choice I made and every person who's been where we've been makes. Do you keep it to yourself, this gift of knowledge? Or do you share it when the time is right with those who need to hear it? I thought about my notebook, filled with detailed descriptions of my experience. About the dreams where Wilson and the others still visited me. About the message I'd been given but hadn't known how to fulfill. I don't know if I'm ready, I admitted. It's still so raw. Frank patted my shoulder gently. That's okay. It took me years. There's no timeline for this kind of thing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pencil. But when you are ready, when you feel that pull like I did today, call me. I'd like to hear your story properly. He scribbled down a phone number, tore out the page and handed it to me. I took it, folding it carefully and tucking it into my own pocket. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than those simple words could convey. He stood wincing slightly as he straightened. No, thank you. For listening to an old man's strange tale, he smiled. Happy Veterans Day, James Erickson. Happy Veterans Day, Frank Sullivan. I watched him walk away, his gait slightly uneven but purposeful. Just before he reached the parking lot, he turned and lifted a hand in farewell. I raised mine in return. As the sun set over the lake, I sat for a long time, turning over our conversation in my mind. The impossible coincidence of our meeting, the shared experience that defied rational explanation, the message we'd both received. For the first time since returning home, I felt a sense of purpose stirring within me, a direction, however vague, beginning to take shape. I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced. And maybe, just maybe, that experience hadn't simply been for me. Maybe, like Frank Sullivan, I had been given a gift meant to be shared. I wouldn't call him right away. I needed time to process this encounter, to consider its implications. But I would call him eventually. Of that, I was suddenly certain. As darkness fell, I stood and made my way back to my car. The weight I'd been carrying since that day in Vietnam felt lighter somehow, more manageable. Not gone, I suspected it would never be completely gone, but transformed like everything else about me. I had died in an ambush and come back with a message. What I would do with that message was still unfolding. But for the first time, I felt ready to find out. When the time is right, speak what you have seen. There are those who need to hear it. The time wasn't right just yet, but it would be. And when it came, I would be ready. I started the car and drove toward home, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky above me. Somewhere among them, I thought, Wilson and Mendoza and the others were watching, waiting, perhaps even guiding me still, from their place beyond the veil. And that thought brought me peace.